4 p.m. Roll call, please.
Director Edwards,
Here.
Director Evans,
Here.
and Director Riley,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. We're all here. Are there any indication that there's public listening in? We'll open it to public comment if there are.
Yes, there are members of the public participating. Oh, I do have John Tilley would like to make a comment. I'm going to unmute you, John, and please make your comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Arlene. Thanks everybody for your hard work. Hope everybody's doing well in these interesting times. Would just like to comment on the first piece in asking if there is an opportunity that the demand and supply report will be put out for a peer review, as the city managers have asked. And it seems to me like this is really more of an agenda item you would find over at the M1W agenda versus the water districts. Thank you very much.
John, just so I can confirm, since it is an action item, you can speak specifically to that item when we're discussing it. But if that's your comment, that's fine too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riley. I appreciate that.
Okay, are there other members of the public that would like to comment on items that are not on the agenda?
I see no other indication that there's public comment, Chair Riley.
Okay, well, let's return it to the board and let's take up action items. Item number 1 is consider development of a recommendation and a letter to the California Coastal Commission. So, Term Manager, I'll refer it to you at this point.
Thank you. The board packet did not have sample letters, but they were sent to you earlier today and posted publicly to our committee page and the website. So they are available for viewing. The Coastal Commission will take up the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project coastal development permit at a hearing in August, currently scheduled for August. At the request of the chair, this item was brought forward to see if this committee wants to make a recommendation to the full board on a similar agenda item to weigh in on that proceeding at the Coastal Commission. The alternatives provided for you, sample letter A actually speaks to the second bullet in this note, and sample letter 1 and 2, 2 speaks to the first bullet. Approval of the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, desal project as is, or in the converse, there's a proposed letter that endorses Pure Water Monterey expansion as an alternative, as a feasible alternative with less environmental adverse impacts. And then choice number 3 would be no letter. This is open for your discussion to make a recommendation.
Thank you. Has the committee members had an opportunity to review these letters?
I have.
Oh, that's just a yes or no question at this point. Okay, well, I'm going to assume we've had a chat. Are there any questions about the letters? And then I'll take this out to the public in case anyone wants to comment from the public. Are there any questions about the letters from the committee members?
Chair Riley, this is Director Evans. I have reviewed the letters and I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you, Director Evans. Director Edwards, do you have any specific questions at this time?
Coming from the board, we first should do it in the way. So
Yeah, we can.
okay.
Yeah, we can change it from the board. I just structured it as on behalf of the board under my signature, but which would be similar to what State Water Board did with theirs. It comes from the board, but yeah, we can just change it to signature from the district board.
Yeah, our district board, instead of putting you up under the heat, we put ourselves up under it. only question I got.
Okay, let's, if we're going to go to the letter specifically, let's go out to the public first and see if there are any comments from the public on these letters. I think John Tilley has already commented that his comments. I just want to make sure other people who are on this committee meeting attendance have an opportunity to weigh in here. So I'll ask the public again if they have any comments. And if nobody shows a waving hand or something, then we'll bring it back to the board. So
Okay.
just give another moment, please.
Yes. I do see John Tilley's hand. I don't know if he, John, if you wanted to speak again, or if your hand is just still raised from prior.
You know, Arlene, I have finally figured out how to lower my hand since that one time I left it up the entire meeting, but thank you. I want to ask if these letters were posted. I saw where in the agenda it said that they would be made available to the public prior to this meeting if there were to be draft letters. Were those posted on the website? Because I wasn't seeing them attached to the agenda.
Right. There's a link in the website that says additional materials for the meeting. So it was posted probably 2.5, 3 hours ago.
John, this is specifically directed toward you, but if you have not had a chance to review the letter, I will give you an opportunity to speak later if you want to take some of that time. But meantime, I'd like to go ahead with the board discussion, but I will bring it back to public comment if you raise your hand.
Sir.
All right, thank you, John. So let's bring it back to the committee and discuss. Sorry. Okay, let's bring it back to the committee and have discussion. So is there any discussion?
Yes, Chair Riley, if I may.
Molly, for me, your volume is very low. And so I don't know about the rest of the public.
Agree.
Well, I'm very soft-spoken.
Listen carefully.
See if I can fix that. Is this any better?
No.
How about now?
Oh, great.
Better? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, okay. So just a thought, Mr. Tilley has brought up on I think more than one occasion that the supply and demand study should be peer reviewed. I think that opportunity, I don't disagree on the idea of a peer review. I just disagree how it should go. I think if the district finds somebody to do a peer review study, that will always have a cloud over it because the district found someone to do it. And I think that there's always, when you're paying somebody to do a study, I think there's always some lack of, there's always some bias inherent in that because the person that you're paying is always going to want to give you the answer that you're paying for. So I question that even if the district was to do a peer review study, I question that it would be considered unbiased by the community. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Can I interject on that subject? The city managers did, in their initial letter to us, suggest that it should be peer reviewed by a consultant of their choosing and at their budget, just to solve that perception of objectivity. They were contacted by a potential consultant, but and I would imagine it might be COVID related, bandwidth, time, or money, but they have not decided to follow through on that. That being said, the city of Marina hired an outside consultant to review our work, as did the Marina Coast Water District hire a consultant to do similar work that confirmed all of our conclusions. So the peers have been out there. It's just, to your point, it wouldn't look very objective for us to hire our own reviewer.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was unaware that the city managers had already indicated an interest to do that. So don't know why that it got stopped. So, but that's fine. I'm done with that subject. I just wanted to lay it out there. As far as the letters go, I think it would be worthwhile to have the entire board review them. So I don't think that it's in a very I personally do not want to make a recommendation on one letter or a recommendation on one of the three options to go forward. I think the full board should have the opportunity to review all three options. So that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Evans. Director Edwards, do you have any comments? I have some following.
Well, a few, I think this make a recommendation to the board. And I know what the board is probably going to say, that's part of politics right there. And I'm not saying the committee is stacked, but I believe this committee should make a determination. I believe all the options should be presented to the full board. And all there. Our letters on both are there. For and probably against not doing it. So I don't mind making a recommendation. That's the hard part of this, is making a recommendation. But I'm willing to make a recommendation. That's all I got, Director Rouse.
Thank you. I have a couple comments too, and it goes a little bit back to John Tilley's comment about peer review. Nobody calls this a peer review when Cal-Am itself has changed its own projections on future, the future demand numbers. And when Cal-Am made its own change or made its own statement in their general rate case that something less than 10,000 acre feet per year is the demand number, it seems to me you can't get a more relevant peer comment on the quality and the conclusions of the district's supply and demand report. So I'm just thinking I am totally done with the peer review question, totally, because Cal-Am itself has agreed with the conclusions of this report. And I don't know that you can get any more peer reviewed agreement than that, regardless of other opinions that may still be out there. So I just want to add that as a peer review statement. Second, in looking at the letters, I see no rationale for a no letter option. I see no option. I don't see that at all. The other thing I have some concerns about is going to the full board without a recommendation suggests that we're kind of in a toss-up arrangement. And I'm not there at all. It seems to me that we have an obligation to our oath of office, to the role of the district, to where the district has been positioning itself over the past 10 years to get into the supply side of water. We have provided leadership on those issues. We have provided reliability and support for those issues. We have supplied money of those issues. And the best partnership possible was with Monterey One Water. The fact that Monterey One Water has slowed things down at the end should not change, in my opinion, should not change at all the commitments that we've made in the past and the general direction that we've been trying to go as a district. So I think it's our duty to make a recommendation and to be actively supporting a supply solution, and as soon as possible. And one of my other reasons for wanting something as soon as possible is because I think we're in a very, very strange world. COVID-19, first of all, I mean, the second of all, but first of all, the CDO is still hanging out there. And until there is going to be some steps, some supply decisions that allow the CDO to be reevaluated by the State Water Board. Until that happens, we're stuck with two economic dynamics here that are horrible for their local community. One is the CDO just stops so much of what could be creative thinking, but the COVID-19 environment has created a real opportunity for some creative thinking by the economic interests or those individual store owners and entrepreneurs and business owners and others. We have closed down their ability to be creative. And they're on two fronts, COVID-19 and the CDO. So from my standpoint, I think we ought to be doing, as a district, everything we can to push a water supply solution into the forefront. It's possible. The one that we've been working on for years now, and in partnership with Monterey One, it's possible that that option may not go forward. At least it may not go forward smoothly, but nevertheless, it's a better option than the desal. And I'm just hoping that we might end up recommending a letter in support of Pure Water Monterey expansion in some fashion. If there's language questions here, and I'll just go back and just see what the dialogue is like. If there's some language issues here, and I've got some suggestions also, I want to go there. But anyway, I just wanted to get a little bit of kind of rationale on why I'm thinking we ought to recommend some letter to the full board. Any more discussion, questions, opinions?
I like the option of no letter there. No letter. The board don't want to do anything. You had that option. The option should be given to the full board, but it's in that option of support for the Pure Water Monterey expansion as feasible alternative. Desal reserved for the future needs. I believe in desal. I don't want to cut that out of the picture. It's regional. Marine Coast said they could build one. They built one before. So if it's publicly owned, I don't think. This desal project on the board right now doesn't help Seaside one bit. 360 degrees, it doesn't help Seaside. I know Pure Water, Seaside, 360 degrees all the way around. So I'm support that. I'll make a motion to support that Pure Water expansion as feasible. It's a good letter. I'll support that. I'll make a motion to support that letter.
Well, I'll second the motion for discussion purposes. On the letter, I'd like to ask the general manager a question about the letter that supports the expansion. Is it possible and is it relevant? It's possible. It's more possible than relevant, maybe. But my question is, can there be another paragraph or bullet point added along the lines that this district has made a substantial investment in Pure Water Monterey, and we will, this is the question, we will interact with Monterey One Water on seeing if we can't get beyond this barricade we're facing. Is it possible to do that? I know we've had a letter to the district, to Monterey One. And I know they've responded. But my question is, this may be more of a question to the full board rather than in this letter, but just a reaction. I would like us to be in a negotiating posture rather than a litigation posture.
Right.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I suggest that you could express that in terms of your optimism that the current and past differences between the agencies are capable of resolution in such a way that the project can proceed.
And Dave Laredo had mentioned scheduling a closed session at the end of the regular board meeting to revisit the threat of litigation recommendation and what we've learned to date and where the position kind of is that still something that's kind of on the calendar?
Yes, it is. I believe we have a closed session. We discussed the potential of litigation. We made a demand to Monterey One Water. Monterey One Water has responded. I believe that we should come back to the board to discuss what the process is and what the prospects are to initiate litigation, to see if the board wishes to provide that authority or not.
Which then could point in the direction that George was just talking about, which is negotiation rather than litigation. I mean, that's still a natural outcome of that discussion.
Is it inappropriate to draft a general statement to put in this letter for the board consideration that we would like to try to work out our differences? Just as an optimist statement in a letter, even though we may not know which path we are on for weeks or months?
I could do whatever you collectively decide you'd like to do. I think the attitude I took is that if, in this case, if this project were the path forward, then certification of the EIR and negotiation of a water purchase agreement would happen very quickly if there's a willing California American. I think the unwillingness of our project partner would evaporate overnight. So I kind of came at it from that standpoint that it's a false barrier, if you will, right now. However, we do have, I think the last or second last item on this agenda is to talk about next steps. So.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. Director Edwards?
I don't want to clutter this letter up. This letter if anything, I wanted to move that last few paragraphs up to the first page and make it as short and brief and to the point as like he did in the second letter. So I want to clutter it up.
Well, and just from my point of view, I think it's a little premature on what I'm asking because it is a discussion that may relate to the closed session options we have. So I'm going to pull that back, but I would like to see us at a future discussion have some discussion about how to move the chains, I guess. Well, Molly, do you have anything more to add on the motion?
I do not.
So I will just ask for the question. The motion is to recommend the longer letter, which is supporting Pure Water Monterey expansion, to the Coastal Commission, in a letter to the Coastal Commission.
Actually, I do have one question, Chair.
Okay.
Regardless of what the outcome of this vote is, will all three options be presented to the board or solely our recommendation?
No, I think all three options will be presented with the committee recommendation related to it.
Thank you.
Is that understood, Dr. Edwards? Yeah, okay.
Presented to the board. All the, so if they feel like no letter is needed, 4 votes. Everybody support the alternative. Everybody one-on-one with what the board considered was back in 2012. That's what we stand with. 40 rules.
Okay. So the motion is to motion is to recommend the letter to the full board, this committee to recommend, but also the committee will support all three options going to the board with the committee recommendation to support the Pure Water expansion support.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. All in favor, roll call, please.
George?
Yes.
I thought you could let me, it's John Tilly. May I have a moment since you?
Oh, yes, yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you, George. And I'm sorry, because I don't think I'm going to change the vote in any way, shape, or form here, but I did have a chance to read the letters. Thanks for having them on the website. I would of course promote version 2. I believe that so much work was done by the district and others to build the water supply project, and nowhere near that amount of work has been done to prove the idea that the expansion of Pure Water Monterey is sufficient to meet the current or future needs of this community. It's a deep concern for all of us that ASR is having difficulties, that phase 1 is having difficulties, and I would prefer to just see focus happen on phase 1 so that we have that in place, and then take care of the rest with a sustainable project. So I find that the idea of sending this letter that you're talking about is when you choose letter version 1 to the Coastal Commission to be disingenuous and reckless. The ideas that are presented in are not proven. The CDO, for instance, it seems very tone deaf that you're not recognizing that the State Water Risk Control Board has pushed back heavily on that. And it just doesn't seem as if it is a very well thought out position that is supported by the facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. I'm glad you interrupted me because I did say that, and I'm glad you got your comments in. So back to the motion, and I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair. To the general manager, you heard, do we have any problems with this letter?
No. No, the factual basis is as strong as it is. I think Mr. Tilley's overstating the Eileen Sobek letter from the State Board to the Coastal Commission. The mathematics over how much water you need to lift the CDO are fairly straightforward, and actually touched on a little bit in here. And we've had sidebar conversations with regulatory staff at the State Water Board, which temper things a little bit, but the standard is, hey, you guys got to go get water, and it has to be sufficient that you're not recidivists and that you come back in here in a year because you only got enough water to get off the river and now you've grown by X. So you have to have water for growth or for the future. And I think that we've always kept those standards in our mind when looking at whether a project is viable or feasible.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee before we go to a vote? Okay, roll call vote, please, Arlene.
Evans,
No.
Edwards, and Riley.
Yes.
Motion approved 2-1.
So for clarification, I'll adjust the staff note to the board so that version 1 and bullet 1 and version 2 and bullet 2 line up. And I do believe I heard an agreement to change it as just coming from the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District Board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And all three options will be on the agenda item next time.
Yeah, I think so, because the do nothing option's already been voiced once or twice in your colleagues who've said, hey, this isn't our fight. It's between the applicant and the commission. We should stay out of it. And I think that is that's the reason it's on the page.
Okay, well, I'm good with that item having been completed for this committee.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to discussion items. The item number 2, which is the steps for removing the CDO.
Yeah, so this is consistent with last month's item, which was the effective diversion limit calculation and how you determine compliance. I can tell you that I shared this staff note verbatim with Eric Ekdahl, who's the Deputy Director for Water Rights at the State Water Board. And so, and the intent there was to have him bless some of our conclusions. So the key thing is how do you lift the CDO? How do you calculate whether you've got sufficiency to lift the CDO? What are going to be the criteria? And what are the mechanics for lifting the moratorium on the setting of new meters? So lifting the CDO is very straightforward. It's straight out of the CDO itself, ordering paragraph 15. And on the surface, it looks like a Cal-Am files a letter saying we have a permanent supply, and the state board looks at the evidence to that and agrees and sends back a concurrence letter that says, okay, all done. There's no way that can happen in a month. You certainly wouldn't expect Cal-Am to send a letter like that until they've flipped the switch and they've got operations going. So you would have to expect at least a month of operations to shake down the project and come to the conclusion like, hey, desal's working great. Or the same thing if it were Pure Water Monterey expansion. It's working great, we're on track. So, imagine there's gonna be some startup window, or it may be that you're so confident as you hit startup that you're ready to send that letter. There's no way the state board's gonna just accept it and turn around in a week. They're gonna need to cogitate. And when I said, does 2 to 3 months sound okay? The state said, yeah, but to be honest, we don't really know. The one interesting part of our conversation was that depending on how much water is in the new water supply option and what the supporting documentation says, they may feel the need to at least have a public workshop, maybe not a full-blown hearing, but calendarize something so the public could also see the supporting documentation. All of their board would have the opportunity to view it. So it wouldn't just be a staff to staff type of thing. There would be some public involvement in the logistics of it. So that 2 to 3 months might turn into 3 to 4 to 5. I did ask them about whether they would want to do the Missouri solution. Show me a whole year of operation to show me that you've actually done it. And that would be what I called the worst case in here. It doesn't sound like that's a criterion that they would hold it to. If you've got an operating new water supply that looks like it's going to do what it's spec'd out to do, and you've got the evidence to support it, then they'll go to work on their concurrence. So then it becomes, how confident are they that, I mentioned recidivism, how confident are they that the community then will have not just enough water to get off the river, but enough water to not be back in the principal's office in 3 years or sooner. So you don't want to just solve your shortfall. You want to have that additional water for future needs, which is, obviously the subject of debate as to how quickly does that happen. So on the second page of the staff note, the tier one, the test one, basically says if you look at the last 5 years worth of pumping and their legal right, the 3376, we only need about 3,200 acre feet. So wouldn't Pure Water Monterey solve that? And the answer is absolutely, if it could all be directly applied to the uses from the river. But it's not. You have to do the second test, which is, do we actually have enough water to serve current demand and then future demand? And so the second test basically says, well, all right, based on where we stand today, and based on the assumption that you're going to fallow 700 acre feet per year for 25 years of the Seaside Basin supply, so that number becomes 774 instead of 1474, you will be in a position to get ASR on average at 1,300. You only take what's legally applied against the river from Sand City desal, and you do get your 3,500 acre feet from Pure Water Monterey. Then based on current demand, we're about 781 acre feet short. Call it 800. What's important to also know, though, is there is more water from Sand City desal that's available. There is more water available in normal to wet years from Table 13 water rights. So chances are in any given year, and also the carryover credits from the alternative producers on the Seaside Basin. So you already come out of the gates with possibility of extra water in the system. And then keep in mind, if you open your first year roughly close to the 5-year prior average demand, in other words, you don't just grow overnight, then all of this new water supply is available. And if you run the plant and store it in the ground, you're also building up a reservoir of saved water. So there's these other things that kind of go on that make your position even better than it's just laid out right here. So you may say, well, I'm not believing 1,300 from ASR in every year until there's a huge reservoir that's built up. Well, that's fine, but in your very first years, you've got this extra water from either a very big desal plant or a moderately sized pure water Monterey expansion. And that extra water has no customers to go to. So you can just choose to build up the reservoir from those supplies if you wanted to. So, you know, I've shared this with the state and they get it. And they even said, so if you came in with a resource that's, 795 acre feet, yeah, we probably spend quite a bit of time on whether or not we feel you're really there and that you're ready to lift the CDO. But I won't say they agreed that either resource, desal or pure water expansion, appears big enough to easily lift the CDO. But I think on the merits, that would be the mathematics. That will be what you're going to do. So then the issue is, okay, let's say they issue their concurrence letter. Then how do we get new service connections? How do we get the moratorium lifted? And that's the last section of the staff note, which is it's a tier 1 advice letter. Those are the easiest kind. And Dave Laredo can weigh in a little more if need be. But you file the letter and you deliver notice to the service list, and that starts a 30-day time frame where if there's no major objection or weakness in the conclusions, then 30 days later, your tariff structure has been revised and you're now able to issue new meters. So, the timeline becomes one of, if it's desal, based on where they're at, we think once they get a coastal development permit, it's still a 30-month process. On pure water Monterey expansion, as soon as they certify an EIR and say that we want you to advance design to a level where you can bid, it's probably about a 20-month process. So those are your 30 or 20 plus the timelines that you've seen here. It could be 2 months, could be 3 months, could be 5 months at the state board, and then at least another month at the PUC.
Questions from the committee? I have some. I'll pursue a couple of mine.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at this time.
Dave, on the timing issue of having a supply and then dealing with the moratorium, it sounds like months between the one, assuming the one doesn't have to have a full year of proven water deliveries. But at some point, the decision around step 1 is that there is a water supply. And then step 2, it's months, is my understanding, months, 3 to 6 months maybe on the tier 1 advice letter. This has a relation to another calendar question I have.
Yeah, that's a reasonable assumption. I can't see it being anything less than 2 to 3 months. And if you add a public workshop or something like that, then you're probably 3 to 4 months. And then you still have that month to get the tier 1 advice letter done. If it were my project and I'm Cal-Am, I would have my letter and my documentation ready to go the day we flip the switch on. And then if in 3 weeks it's looking really good and there's plenty of water coming off the water factory, then I'd file that letter and I would start drafting my tier 1 advice letter so it's ready to go as soon as I hear back from the state. but that's never the way things really work. You hear back from the state and maybe another 3 weeks goes by, another month, who knows? But the way you've characterized it is pretty good, 3 to 6 months.
And the other calendar question I have is, let's say the pure water expansion just sits on a shelf. Let's say that CalAm's desal does move forward in some fashion. Do you think the state would apply the same criteria to desal as they would to pure water Monterey expansion in terms of proof of delivery, water in the ground, water in the pipes, so on?
Yeah. Because we've proven large-scale capital projects can be delayed. The construction period can be delayed. So until you're really running it and have some evidence of productivity or the capacity, then I don't think you can rely on everything going perfectly. I mean, look at our Pure Water Monterey discussion that we're going to have in a couple agenda items. Everything is built as designed, but the design wasn't necessarily the best design, and there was some value engineering where maybe we went too far, and so now we've got to backfill. So you don't always come out of the door running at full capacity.
Well, I only want to raise the question about that because I think in the calendar of when we can meet the CDO obligations, the calendar for that seems to me that Pure Water Monterey expansion is building on a project that will have a track record here shortly. We're beginning to get a track record, but and so the unknowns down the road may be far less with Pure Water Monterey expansion than they are with desal. And I'm only talking about production timeframe, not litigation and any other thing that may be taking place. So anyway, that's just where my brain is now about trying to see where could there be some flexibility in the local economy that does not have water as a hangup.
Yep.
And that's all I'm going to. Are there other comments or questions from the committee? Yes.
Man, how can we get that back? 300 acres and we got 94. Are we guaranteed the 94, or some months it's 0? What can we do with that?
Yeah, so we're assuming that they're going to address their intake issue, which should also help them address their discharge issue. Currently, they've been adding roughly 20 acre-feet a month, so they're back to close to capacity. But yeah, the 94. So nameplate capacity on Sand City desal is 300. It's been averaging quite a bit less than that, somewhere between probably 200 and 240. I've got that number somewhere. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But that's a lot more than 94. So 94 was when approval for the project was first made, and the state in effect negotiated with the company and said, yeah, but 94 acre-feet of that is going to apply against Sand City's unlawful diversions from the river. So whatever it's producing, the first 94 has to offset river production. And I think 94 is pretty, I won't say guaranteed, but I think it's pretty likely to be in there year in and year out.
Okay, so first 94 probably goes to the river. How much goes to the district, if any?
Yeah, well, so none. They've allotted about 5 acre-feet for particular projects. And so any production above the, call it 99 or 100 acre-feet. So 94 of it goes into the CalAm system. Cal-Am over here on the river has to back off 94 acre-feet of pumping. The other 5 that's been allocated also goes into the Cal-Am system, but it was because it's an entitlement. It was in effect allowing Sand City to grow despite the CDO and set new meters and so forth. But if they ran at 200 acre-feet per year, that means there's another 100 acre-feet that just flows into the Cal-Am system to offset demand. When we're still under the CDO, that additional 100 acre-feet actually further is required to offset river withdrawals. But let's say we got out of the CDO and there's still 100 acre-feet that are available from Sand City desal. Then the company would have to look at it from the standpoint of where's my cheapest cost of water? Should I be running our own desal plant, brand new desal plant more? Or if it's not the new desal plant, it's Pure Water Monterey, do we run that more? Is it better to back off the Sand City desal plant? And, we're still going to pay Sand City our lease payment. You'll have to make a decision about where your water is coming from and where you're going to dispatch it to. But at the beginning, with any of the new proposed water supplies online, there's going to be too much water for current demand. And so you'll be making choices as a water operator. Do you want to overproduce and bank some of that water? Do you only want to produce what your demand is? If you're only producing what your demand is, how much excess capacity do you have? Promises were made to the Public Utilities Commission that if we get our desal plant, we're going to run it at a certain range of capacity factor. Well, if you're not running it close to the 83% that you said, or 86% that you said, is it still the risk allocation fairly done between ratepayers and shareholders? I don't think that the PUC gave a strong enough answer on that. But they did raise the questions about equity and who should pay more prominently with the return flow agreement, which is, okay, you say it could be 3%, it could be 6% of fresh water that needs to be returned to the Salinas Basin. What if it's 15%, or what if it's 18%? It's a very huge subsidy that the peninsula ratepayers would have to pick up to produce this additional water. And the PUC did address in their decision that issue. And so, as an operator, when you've got a regulator on one side that's watching how you fulfill your promises that were written into an ordering decision, yet you've got these resources over here that are actually pretty cheap to, it's cheap to pump water out of the Seaside Basin. And if you've got a legal right to do it, you may choose to do it. So this balance between which resources get produced in the early years is going to be a real interesting issue, because you're still going to have to pay the fixed costs whether you pull water from the project or not.
Okay. And this 1,300, is that the minimum?
No, the minimum's been 0. But remember, the operating regime that we're forced to operate under with the CDO is all water that goes in a year is supposed to come out in the same year, so that you're not using additional river water in the summer months to meet demand. Well, what's really happened to date is when we've had some good years, I think, and John is on the call, but I think we've got still over 2,000 acre-feet of water stored from prior ASR years. So even though we only pumped in like 9,300 or whatever that number was that I reported last month, if you've got 2,000 plus in the ground, you could still produce 1,300, right? And so that's the concept is, as we move forward, you're going to build up the reservoir behind the dam, and you'll always be able to produce 1,300. But will you, in any one year, be able to inject 1,300? And the answer is no. There will be years where you can only inject 0 to 300 to 500, and then you rely on that reservoir to keep making your 1,300 on average number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions on this item.
The Coastal Commission, Gannon.
This is just an information item for you all, but as I said, it did go to staff at the State Water Board.
Yeah.
And one of the, I guess, important things about staff seeing that is, I think they better understand the magnitude of what it's going to take to lift the CDO and how much water that really is. So I think it was useful from that standpoint.
But it was the Coastal Commission, because that's really putting us in with, tell them this is what we really need and what.
Yeah, so in some respects we did. So the bullet point that said there's more than enough to lift the CDO did say, you know, you only need 800 to lift the CDO, and this is going to have more than enough in it.
Are there any members of the public that would like to comment?
Yes, there is someone who has raised their hand. So we will. Oh, let's see. Sorry.
Public's invited to speak.
Yes, I need to make him available to speak. I'm sorry that it's taking me some time here. All right, please go ahead, Mr. Tilley.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm looking at the State Water Resources Control Board letter that was recently sent to the Coastal Commission. And throughout it, it references the project. It references Pure Water Monterey being part of that project, and it is the three-legged stool. In it, they say that the cease and desist order will only be resolved or lifted after Cal-Am satisfactorily demonstrates that it has obtained a permanent supply of water, and permanent is italicized. It concerns me that the expansion is dependent upon rainfall and is dependent upon water moving from the Salinas Valley Basin to the peninsula. Honest guys and ladies, board members, if I believed that the expansion of Pure Water Monterey would satisfy the requirements of this community on a day-to-day basis for years to come, I would be all over it. It'd be a great alternative. I'm not sure if Sacramento is convinced. I don't believe they are, that this project cures our difficulties down here with water. I'm not convinced it does. I wish I was, but I'm just simply not. And it frightens me, the idea that we're going to see if things work out through the expansion, that we'll give it a couple of years and that we'll just delay things to see if the expansion works out. That sounds really, really dangerous to me. Water is incredibly important. It is going to be expensive around here, unfortunately, but I feel it's better to have water that is secure than having water that is insecure, that you can't trust if it's going to be there from year to year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
I see another commenter.
Please.
Mr. Westhoff, go ahead, please.
Committee members, my name is Steve Westhoff. I'm an attorney with the State Water Resources Control Board. Again, I was planning to just listen in. I did want to clarify on Ms. Silbeck's letter, since my board members have certainly been receiving emails and letters lately on this. The reference to a permanent supply, the main thing I want to emphasize there is that as we observe, neither the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project or Pure Water Monterey expansion will be online in time, at least to meet the stated deadline for ceasing unauthorized diversion. And I think, as Mr. Stolt mentioned, there's still a determination for the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights and perhaps for the board to provide some input publicly on what is sufficient. But again, to emphasize this publicly where I can, the State Water Board hasn't made a determination as to whether or not one of the larger competing projects is inadequate to meet the CDO. I think that is just a determination to be seen. The overall message is we really encourage Cal-Am, the local agencies, and the community to work together to move a project forward. And our encouragement for Coastal Commission to take an action is really driven by the observation that it seems like something needs to move forward and a decision needs to be made both at the local and at the state level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westhoff. I'm glad you were listening. Any other comments about so far? Otherwise, I'll go to the presentations.
I see no other comments, Chair Riley.
All right, let's proceed to the presentations. We have three updates plus future agendas. So, General Manager, I'll turn it over to you and we'll just walk through them. And
Yep. So the first one, Maureen Hamilton, it's Maureen Hamilton, is currently managing two projects over in that area. One is the Pure Water Monterey injection well facilities, as well as the ASR Santa Margarita construction. So she's put together this update, and Maureen, I think you're going to walk us through it.
Are we looking for the advance, please?
Yes, I have your, I will move it to the next. Yes.
The most obvious construction visible from the street is clearly the building. The cellar was a little less obvious, but the block wall has been going up.
Maureen, it's difficult to hear you.
yes.
Arlene, would you mind muting everyone except Maureen? I think there are a few people with hot mics that are interfering.
Is this any better? Arlene, is this any
All
better?
right, I have muted everyone except for Maureen. Now I've muted myself.
I hope that it's a better volume. If someone can give a thumbs up, that would thank you. Arlene, if you could advance to the next slide, please. So the first four slides are basically descriptions of the block going up. Arlene, if you could advance to the next slide, please. There we go. And that's fine too. We have concrete hollow floor plank roofs. They're fire resistant, well, they're fireproof. And it was, excuse me, amazing to see how quickly the roof got placed. That's what these two slides are. Some I pulled up as the first slide with the planks, which I guess I had expected them to be a lot bigger. I was surprised at how many there were. And on the photo on the right, you can see the crane lifting them into place. It was 2 hours and they were done, and we were almost watertight. So we put a layer of concrete on top and we're good to go.
Maureen, you're still garbled in the way I hear it.
I'm sorry. I'm on.
That's better.
Okay. I will not move. So, Arlene, if you could forward, please. I'll just make these real fast. The roof structure is being installed along with the HVAC, and if you drive by, you'll see the underground piping is being installed. As soon as we get that in and tied in, we'll get the above ground works and start outfitting with the instrumentation and analyzers. And that is all I have.
Yeah, it's great. And those are terrific pictures. When do you think the roof will go on?
The roof is in the process of going on. So the flat part of the roof is in place. It is watertight. The bit of the roof that's going on now is basically there to shield the HVAC. That was the city's substantial complaint with the middle school site, is that you can see the HVAC from the road. So they wanted the HVAC hidden. We're doing that by almost a faux roof. The other thing that does is it's a pretty tall building, even with very tall doors. The building would look odd from the street. So that roof, line of the roof that you're seeing in the previous slide being trimmed out in wood makes the building look more in proportion. It's more aesthetically pleasing, especially from the street side. But we are watertight. We have been for some time. And I'm sorry, there was one more slide. We've got a meter on the 30-inch line that's going in our driveway. And that's there right there, literally 4 inches between the corner of that meter vault, which is about 8 feet by 7 feet by 8 feet deep. It's got about 4 inches clearance between the two pipes that are in service. So they did a superb job getting that in. And then we've got the conduit going outside the electrical building to get power to all the chemical rooms. And I apologize, I also forgot to mention in the staff notes for the administrative committee, I'll have a schedule and change order acceptance for that.
All right.
Okay, that was a status report. Are there any more?
Arlene, can you unmute Director Edwards?
Thank you. Hey, change orders, are we caught up with them? Or are they still out there for us to do?
There are more change orders for us to do. As you saw with that last slide, we're just starting the electrical. And that's where you can start having them add up. We have not had any new change orders since last month, but we're in the process of negotiating a couple of them. They should be negotiated by the time I have to get the administrative committee staff meeting.
So are we still on schedule?
We had about a 10-day slip in large part, well, all of the slips were due to COVID, but those roof planks were several days, well, they were several weeks away, but the contractor was able to make that time. And the flow meter that's going in that big old vault in that last slide, we were very worried about its timeline to show up, but it arrived late last week. So we lost probably about 2 weeks there. Right now it looks like August 3rd, they're going to get over to Carolina based on a May schedule. They are trying to recover schedule. I know the guys are working on tonight to get that vault excavated around it so they can get the next piping.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions from the committee? I'm going to let General Manager just proceed.
Okay, so the next one's update on Pure Water Monterey. The advanced water purification facility is working great. The pipeline is working great. The limiting component is the injection capacity at the well fields. You may have heard me earlier mention that due to value engineering early on in the process, it was decided to build 2 deep wells and 2 shallow wells, or Vado zone wells. The original concept had been 4 pairs of each, or 4 pairs. And we have 2, and it's becoming fairly self-evident that 2, even under perfect operations, puts you very close to the edge, and that a redundant 3rd deep well would be a very wise investment. So we can put this back on Maureen for questions, but she is a little hard to hear. But a decision's been made to do some test borings at 2 other well sites to see what the geology yields, and then make a decision over which of those 2 would be the place to go forward with a 3rd deep well. So it goes test boring, then it would be $200,000 test well, if you would, followed by a permanent well in the $3 to $4.5 million range. There's some discussion about whether the district would foot the bill for all of that, or the district would step in and use WIFIA loan funding through the EPA's program. None of that decision making has happened yet, but it's once we get the results of the test borings, that'll indicate a lot. Maureen, maybe you can update us on what's going on with the Vado zone wells to stabilize the footings and kind of bring those back to life.
We're having an all hands on deck final meeting with Trinity Bank on Wednesday, and we're going to put forth the final recommendation at that time.
Update that on June. So where we going with this?
Yeah, if there's something reportable comes out of their meetings, yeah, we've been kind of waiting to see what geotech directions we've been given, what the timing is, and it makes more sense to try to fix the Vado zone wells rather than abandon them. There's some additional well development that's going on right now with respect to the deep wells. And so we'll try to keep you apprised of everything. So yeah, once Maureen has her meeting, if it's reportable, I'll bring it back in the GM report.
Yeah, I would think we're pushing them, but it's critical to this community that project working. So please stay up on top of them.
Yeah, so
too much now.
Everybody knows, our partners know, we know, the company's gone out of their way to point out that we have an obligation that we need to meet. We're at about 565 acre feet already injected. So we're still very close to the most recent performance start date that we provided in our last letter to California American, which is, I think that was August 10th. That's still possible at this point.
Well, then along those lines, to the extent that the district or Monterey One may be on the line for paying for another well, is there any complications about whoever pays for it? I assume if Monterey One pays, they're already into the water purchase agreement understanding or not? That's one question. The other is, if the district ends up paying for it, what's the reimbursement arrangement we need to have, or do we need to change anything?
Yeah, we've preliminarily signaled that if we fund it, we'll seek to get it reimbursed through the water rate. We didn't say whether that's a 10-year, 15-year, or 20-year period, but that would be the idea would be to finance it. So we finance it internally and then recover it over time. But the WIFIA program, which is a water infrastructure finance something program, could be an actual borrowing that would do the same thing. But yeah, all of these have impacts on the price of water. There's been concern about additional capital investment. This would add another, it's not hundreds of dollars per acre foot, but it's tens of dollars per acre foot. And so we're very attuned to that. In the past, when Director Brower was around and others, the district has always held out there that we might have to step in with either a capital investment to help buy down the cost of water, or in this case, capital investment to make the project operate at its maximum potential. And it's not like it would be easy for us to own the well. I mean, it'd probably be easier to own the well than to own any of the expansion, because the expansion are all items that would go in existing sites on Monterey One Water land. Here we're on an easement, but we can address those issues at some point. But I think some form of a reimbursement agreement to get the money back would be what we would look to.
There wouldn't be any reason to think that that may be complicated or difficult, does it?
No.
The assumption is that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, go in and check to see do we qualify for the loan that you're talking about, instead of waiting to the last minute and then try to get it?
Well, yeah, so we've already been approved for, I believe it's up to 40 million for Pure Water Monterey expansion. And so the idea here would be either to try to move some of that pre-approval into finishing the project, or do another round of application. The third would be to try to increase your authorization, which we're told is possible, but typically only happens when some of the other applicants who've had approval decide not to move forward with their project. So it kind of frees up more capacity. But we're on it. I think that if we do it as a separate application, yeah, we would have to be doing that today, which means what would really happen is the district would front the money and then try to get it reimbursed through WIFIA. And we would only do that if we felt the terms would be so much better than just doing internal financing and getting it repaid over time through the water rate. But
Well,
yeah,
I like for us to check into it. I don't feel like waiting to the last minute and then we checking into it. So,
yeah.
somebody doing a little extra work, but let's start checking into it.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? I'm going to just invite if the public wants to chime in any way, just put your hand, whatever that process is, so that we notice. Okay, the next one is Pure Water expansion. Next steps.
Yes, and this was at your request, Chair Riley. I think some of our earlier discussion alluded to some of these issues may provide some clarity in closed session after our board meeting on the 15th. Decision about litigation versus negotiation is an important one. Some of the things that we can do and the legal work required to learn about that, I think can be discussed at that time. But we are working on it being as cryptic as possible.
Well, and I understand that details can't be discussed and so on. I'm just concerned that what started out to be a good working relationship has gone very south, and that's unfortunate. And I don't want to just let politics or personalities or individual interests or even out of area interests kind of dominate the discussion. I think what ought to be very much on the table is an effort to work together and to work out our differences. And it's not uncommon to have these kind of things go on. It's also not uncommon to work out differences. But there's got to be a willingness on both sides to do that. I just want to make sure that, yeah, that side knows that there's a willingness on this side to do that. That's my main interest.
Yeah. No, and I think it's delicate right now. We still, we said we were going to withhold payment. until we decide whether we're going to litigate or get satisfaction. They've provided us some effort to kind of leave us less of an option to sue, let's say. I'm not sure that's going to satisfy the whole board, which is why we need to talk about it on the 15th. But we're holding their reimbursement in abeyance until the full board has a chance to talk about it. So that's one thing that I think it's still going to, the relationship's still going to be difficult until we resolve whether or not we're going to pay them. And so we need to work on that one. And the 15th will, that'll be part of it. But I can't really say much more than that until the full board meets and decides which path they want to go down.
I understand. Are there any comments that the committee would like to make? Because that's all I'm having is comments.
No. We help.
Okay, let's go to the last item, suggested items for future agendas. I've got one, maybe.
I have one.
Maud, do you like to go first, please?
Sure. So I've been doing some thinking, and I think this committee might be a good place for it, unless the chair decides that the full board would be a better place. I'd like to discuss revisiting our relationship with Monterey One Water, having to do with Pure Water Monterey. There's been a lot of talk from their board that they don't want to be in the water business. They don't want to spend their wastewater ratepayer money on water supply projects. And they're struggling with the expansion. And I think that's divided their board. And so I feel like maybe we should sever the relationship and take on Pure Water Monterey as a district project. And whether there's a way we could do that, I think that's worthy of discussion.
Yeah, I agree with that. You could start the water supply committee way to the behind that.
Well, I'm all in for resolving differences of opinion, and I'm also all in for moving as quickly as we can with supply projects. And I also think that we have a duty to move forward on some of these fronts. So I would welcome that kind of discussion. I think I'm just curious about where the Water Demand Committee might be involved in this too, or not. Should it come up there?
No, it's not a bright line, but the dividing line is typically, well, take for example the water and supply, water demand and supply analysis. Demand and permitting things that use water is kind of the water demand side of the business. Provision of water in order to meet those demands is the water supply planning side of the business. So this is definitely a water supply issue, and should stay with this committee.
Okay, well, this is a subject for future discussion.
Yeah.
And so I'm all in for that. I had a question that I didn't, you probably explained it once, Dave, some time ago. There was a supposedly math error in CalAM's calculations for water demand numbers.
Yeah.
Do you recall?
Well, there's many errors in the water demand side, but the math error that's being referred to is how the dollar cost per acre foot has been represented publicly. And there was a chance to fix that error, and it just got exacerbated. Basically, at the end of December of last year, December 31st, they did a advice letter filing, advice letter 1220. It has subsequently been revised. The very last 2 pages of that advice letter filing were the model outcome pages that show the first year of used and useful total cost. And you just follow it down, and then there's a dollar cost per acre foot for variable and for fixed and for total. And there's a persistent math error that is in there. And so it's dividing by the wrong denominator. It's dividing by a plant working at 100% capacity for every day of the year, plus the 3,500 acre feet of pure water Monterey. So even though the model's all about the desal costs and the total annual cost of desal, it's dividing by a slightly overstated capacity, because he actually operated it at 86%. You're not operating it at 100%. But more importantly, it's dividing by that plus pure water Monterey water at 3,500 acre feet. So then your dollar cost per acre foot is reduced significantly. And so that's what that story out there has been about. And
Well, I'm not sure how important this is. To me, it's important because it's the cost of water and it's a calculation for the cost of water. And that is part of the public discussion about, the two optional approaches to water, the water supply. And I'm just wondering is there a way to put that into,
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry.
do you want to place this item on the agenda?
Well, that's my question. Do you think you can place a small explanation on the next agenda for trying to explain that?
sure.
Thank you. For the good of the order, are there any other comments or questions from the board? Otherwise, we're ready to adjourn.
George, PM, how long would it take y'all to start generating something that to for Monterey buying it? What, 3 or 4 months, so we can get it on the agenda for discussion, action? I prefer action.
So I didn't understand the question.
Well, Evans is asking how put it to generate the report to get to the board.
Yeah, that's a great question. We'd have to do some work with Monterey One Water just to check their appetite. We've actually gotten mixed signals on this. I think some of you board members who've met with some of their board members have heard both sides of the equation, which is something that we'd have to kind of vet and find out if there's a real interest here. Because I do know that there's some of their board members who said we never should have gotten into this. We'd love to get out of it. And I've had others I've heard others say that, this is part of the whole One Water approach to the brave new world.
Well, Dave, it doesn't have, part of it would be a discussion on restructuring the arrangement, because this SEIR discussion has shown that they have control over how much of our money is being spent on this project. And that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, that they can just choose to not certify the SEIR and it costs us an extra $250,000, which their decision is not the same as our decision, but we will take the financial hit. So even if there's no appetite for them allowing it to become a district project and exiting from that arrangement, I would like to revisit the arrangement that we have so that there is a little more of an equitable partnership.
Dave, the question to you is, when will you be ready to tee up the start of that discussion?
Yes, that is the question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and so Molly's version of the events, we can get going on pretty quick. I did talk to their general manager about the payment in abeyance, and I talked to him a little bit about our timeline and their timeline. So we're starting to talk about the relationship, but doing what Molly said, we can get started on that right away. Bringing them around to say, hey, we want to parcel out this piece of our property and have you take it over and By the way, here's 5 staffers we've trained up who would now become part of the water organization. That's a much lengthier,
We can rent. Just saying,
that we can rent.
rent.
Yeah.
Rent to own, we can just rent.
Mr. Chairman, I'm hearing that there can be an initial discussion of options in 2 months.
That's about right.
Sound good. All right.
I didn't hear 2 months, I heard 2 weeks.
I'll be 2 months because this agenda is full. So 2 months sound good to me.
Well, Dave, I'd like you to update report a month from now and see where we are.
Yeah.
Thank you. If there's nothing more from the committee, before I hammer down the close,
Go ahead, George.
all right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.